Over the last 2 years, I decided I wanted to expand my literary horizons, so I decided to only read new books during this period of time. And although I have had a fantastic time reading new books, new worlds, new adventures, it wasn't always like that. Growing up, I would read the same series and the same books over and over and over again, coming back for that cozy and warm hug of those characters that we love or love to hate, and knowing what the plot was and where it was going and being able to just enjoy the story. So, as I said, it's been 2 years since I've done a reread of any of my favorite series, and I went to go and pick up probably the 50th or 60th new book during the last 2 years, and I felt my books and my bookshelf just whispering to me. It felt like my bookshelf wouldn't let me pick up something new again. I had old friends and old worlds that I hadn't frequented in a long time, and the pull to go back and reread something rather than jump into something new was almost gravitational. And I don't know if you, like me, have ever felt that before, where I even had the new series in my hand, which I was really excited to read, and I'm still really excited to read as well. It just happens to be the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, which I'm going to be jumping into next. But the old worlds, like I said, were pulling me in. Have you ever felt that yourself? And the pull was so strong that I decided to break from my streak of new books and go and jump back into something I've read 100 times before. And that's why I decided to do this video, which is the case for rereading. And in this case, there will be a lot of points. The first one being that rereading is oh so familiar. It's kind of like just putting on your favorite movie. You know what's gonna happen. It's cozy, it gives you a hug, you love the characters or you love to hate the characters, you know where the plot is going, and it doesn't require much brain power to read. It can almost even feel like a physical hug when you pick it up and you go back to that world and those characters that you've seen 100 times before. And sometimes the first line will even put a smile on your face. One series that really got me started on reading when I was probably 6 or 7 years old was Harry Potter, as probably the same for lots of people my age. And the first line of the very first book always puts a smile on my face, because I know that I have 7 awesome books in front of me to enjoy. And even though the story is a little bit childish now, of course, it still puts a massive smile on my face. So I got that first line, I could probably remember it word for word, but I didn't want to mess it up. And it goes, this is in the Sorcerer's Stone or the Philosopher's Stone, depending on UK or US. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. And that's the first line, and it just brings back so many memories. I remember opening it. My mum had got that book for like maybe Christmas or as a gift, and she'd never read it. She suggested I read it, and I remember reading that first line and then just becoming completely lost in that world for the next like 4 or 5 years as the books and the movies came out at the same time. So not only is it familiar, but it's also very private and personal, and I'll explain what I mean. Books tend to be a lot cozier than movies, in my opinion. And the reason for that is I had some friends who would read growing up, but not loads of them. It's not as common as your friends watching the same movie as you or the same TV show. Oftentimes the marketing budgets are nowhere near as big as for movies, so not many people will see them. I suppose Harry Potter, the example I used previously, is an anomaly. Outside of that, it's not very often that everybody's read the same books. So a lot of these worlds that the authors would create felt like they were only for me, because I didn't really know anybody else who was reading these authors and had nobody to talk to about it. So it really was just my imagination of what this author had written. And I suppose that might be a little bit different today with the rise of YouTube and the rise of the internet. I'm not that old, I'm only 30, but being born in 1994, there was a bit of a sweet spot where people were very connected, but people weren't always online as a lot of us are these days. So I had these authors like Michelle Paver, Darren Shan, and a bunch of others, especially smaller authors in the UK like Robert Muchamore and a few others as well, And I didn't know anybody else who'd read those books. And I didn't go online and search for other people who'd read them either. I was just me, these characters, and these worlds. And they felt intensely personal. It felt like something that nobody else had access to in a way. I don't know if you completely understand what I'm talking about, but I'm sure there's some books you've read that it seems like not many others or nobody you've spoken to has read them as well. And it feels private, it feels personal, and it feels like that world is just for you. And you can't get that, in my opinion, with movies or with first-time read-throughs. The third point is the details. The level of detail that I'm able to pick up on when I'm rereading, because I'm not chasing the end, I'm not chasing the crescendo and the knowledge of how this story will end, means that I can relax, and I oftentimes pick up so much more detail than when I'm doing my first read through and I am chasing that end. And as I've done this YouTube channel, I've actually found that I paid a lot more attention to the detail on the first time read through. But regardless of how much attention you're paying on the first read through, so much is happening and it's so exciting that you will miss a lot of detail. And some of this detail is so glorious and well planned when you start to reread and reread and reread these series. Because the fact of the matter is the writers spend so long planning and writing these books, and the amount of detail that's gone into them just can't be picked up on a first, second, or third read through for some books. And I'll give you some examples. So one example, and this is actually a series that I haven't reread, is The Wheel of Time. I know when I go back and read The Wheel of Time for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, and 10th time, there's going to be an endless amount of foreshadowing and detail that I didn't pick up on. And endless isn't the right word. I think a glorious amount that I didn't pick up on, because that's what everybody says. And even on the small amounts that I did pick up on, it was so well laid and well planned by Robert Jordan that I just know there's going to be layers and layers and layers of it. A better example, only better because I've actually reread this a lot of times, is The Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss. And this actually isn't finished, but the first two are so good that I've read them over and over again. These books took him a very long time to write, each one. The third one is taking so long that I don't even know if it's going to be written in my lifetime. And you can tell when you go and read it, and you read it back and you read it back, the foreshadowing, but just the crafting of the sentences and how well the world is knitted together around you. You literally, it's impossible to appreciate the level of detail that's gone into it on the first read through. And I wouldn't have gotten maybe 60 or 70% of the overall enjoyment I got from those books if I hadn't gone and reread it and reread it and reread it. So my third point is the detail that you will get to enjoy. My fourth point is the emotions that are tied to it. Picking up a book and being lost in it oftentimes reminds me of when I first read that series or that book, and it will bring me back to being, sometimes a child, sometimes a teenager, sometimes, a younger adult version of myself, or maybe even just a year or two ago. And it's strange how it can transport you to that part of your life as well. It's very strange how it's able to do that. Some series reminds me of my childhood home that I lived in until I was about 13. Some remind me of the home that I lived in from 13 to 19 before I moved out. Some remind me of my time at university. Some remind me of my time here in the US when I moved here, first to Miami, then Los Angeles, and then here in Dallas. I was reading different things at all of those times, and it really can transport you, and you feel some of those emotions that you were going through and the things that were happening when you first read the book. And yeah, it just transports you emotionally, which is so impressive. And I feel like other forms of entertainment, I suppose, don't do that. And leading on nicely from the emotions that it will bring to you is also the changes that you will notice in yourself through rereading these books. And there was a Greek philosopher, and I don't want to butcher this, so I'm going to read it off of my notes. And he said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man." And I think that is very much the same of books. And although a book isn't as changing as a river is. The amount that you change as a person, like over the years, when you go back and reread, you look at things so differently. And sometimes it's amazing how much of a different opinion and perspective you have on the story and on the book and some of the characters inside of it. I've reread books from when I was not so much a child, but a young adult. And although sometimes they're quite simplistic now, some of them were still stimulating enough to read as an adult. And sometimes I'll really really identifying with a character, or really feeling strongly about one plot line and or one team, so to speak. And then when I go back, I completely disagree with that character. I think that they are ignorant or misguided or just completely unreasonable. And the character that I felt like that about previously when I read it, I now identify with. And sometimes you go back and that's not the case. You still identify with the character, or believe or want the certain character to win, but for completely different reasons. And something that enthralled you before maybe isn't so exciting. And then sometimes the nuance and the storyline and the small things and the politicking that happens, rather than the grand gestures and epic fights near the end, will capture you, and you'll be much more interested in that, and you'll find that that relates to your life now way more than what related to your life when you read it previously. And an example of this is in Con Iggulden's series. So Con Iggulden is an author that I read a lot of growing up, and he will take the facts of a historical figure like Julius Caesar or Genghis Khan, and he will take those and basically bring out a story of their life, but whilst colouring it with fiction and making it even more exciting than their lives would have been, and filling in a lot of gaps. But anyway, so in one series he follows Julius Caesar, and when I was a teenager, I very much associated with Brutus, Marcus Brutus, who was, Julius Caesar's right-hand man for a long time, and then eventually killed him. Not that I'm planning on killing anybody, but that was I just remember thinking, like, I like this character. I see a bit of myself in this character, especially when they're young. And then when I got a bit older and I was 18 or 19 and I reread the books, I felt like Julius Caesar was much more impressive. He had a much stronger idea on life and how to treat people and how to get things done and how to be a conqueror. And I thought that Brutus was weak, and I thought that he was petty and he was jealous, and I still think that he's a lot of those things now. But then I reread them not that long ago, and I decided that they were both extremely egotistical people and would be almost impossible to deal with on a day-to-day basis, because Julius Caesar, for example, in this series, is completely unreasonable. He has absolutely no time for anybody else winning except for him in any part of his life, which is a sign normally of a sociopath. And then Brutus basically rides his coattails and is happy to accept that while it's working for him. And then when it isn't working for him, completely changes his tune and is very hypocritical. And it's just, I know that's a very detailed example that maybe we didn't need, but that was what came to mind when I thought of it. And I bet when I read it again in a couple of years, I don't know, who knows, maybe I'll be back round to thinking that Brutus was a bit more reasonable, or Caesar. But that's my example there. And I'm sure you probably have a ton of examples of when you've reread books and certain characters no longer appeal to you, or some characters did really appeal to you. And I'd love to hear about that in the comments. And mainly what I've talked about rereading here is fiction, but I do want to spend a bit of time talking about non-fiction as well, because I've read a lot of non-fiction in my time, and I've reread a lot of non-fiction in my time as well. When you reread non-fiction, the message sinks in. Non-fiction books, especially those that are more designed around educating you, or self-help or self-betterment or psychology, or some kind of idea that you're trying to either learn or implement, or both, in your life, the authors oftentimes spent a lifetime learning about this. They are an expert in their field, hopefully, if you're reading their book. And for you to have the idea, or for me, because I had this idea, to have the idea that I could read that book over a week and personify those ideals and really integrate them into my life, is actually mental if you think about it. And the first book that put me onto properly learning from some of these, more self-help and non-fiction books was How to Win Friends and Influence People. Because at the start of it, very smartly or intelligently, it suggests that you underline things as you go and you annotate and you take notes. And it also suggests that on every chapter, you read that chapter twice before you move to the next one. And as a young man, I thought that was crazy. And then as I got older and I was really serious about learning and trying to implement some of those ideals that are in that book, it was the most useful thing, because I didn't realize how much wasn't going into my brain and how little I could remember from just reading it through one time. And there really isn't much going in. I don't have any statistics, but I'm sure there's some crazy statistics as to just reading one time versus reading it twice and annotating and going back each year and looking at it. So the way that I get the most out of rereading non-fiction is I will have the same book on my nightstand for 3 to 6 months, and I will read, depending on the book and how it's laid out, but I will only read 3 to 10 pages at a time, and then I'll go back and reread that 3 to 10 pages the next night before I go to sleep. And in the morning I'll try and recall what it said, and I'll try and figure out, well, how am I going to implement this in my day today? And I'll write down bullet points, and I'll set alarms on my phone to revisit it in the evening. Not because I love rereading the same 10 pages over and over, because it is tedious and frustrating sometimes, but I just haven't found any other way to really implement what a book is trying to explain to me. And one that's been really useful over the last couple of years is How to Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty. And every time I feel like I'm getting the concepts down, I'll begin another reread and go through it, and there will be so much that I missed. And even if I remember the concept really well, it turns out I'm kind of missing the point of it because I didn't pay enough attention to the setup and how he was thinking about it. Or maybe it's just that I have changed as a person since that first read and the perspective is different. But that's just my 2 cents on reading non-fiction. So really, there is no correct answer when it comes to should you reread or should you read something new. My advice would be do whatever you want to do. If you want to reread the same series over and over and over again, then welcome to the club, because that's what I have done with so many series for my entire life, and I will not feel shame for it. I want to dive into the same characters, the same problems, the same issues, the same worlds, the same magics, the same everything, because I will find something new in the same every single time. But what I will say is, at some point when you read your favorite series, it had to be new to you. So your new favorite series, the one that you're going to read 20 times over the course of your life, might just be the next new book that you pick up. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I do a bunch on my channel of rereading and reacting to new series that I'm reading, and we'd love to have you along for the ride. Tell me what you love to reread. What's your series where maybe the book is battered and broken and you could probably recite a lot of it off the top of your head, and you have no shame in saying you've read it 50 times when there's new books that you bought that you haven't even opened up yet. I'd love to hear what your favorites are. Thank you.